What's good, y'all? With the NBA season kicking off in less than a week, I figured now is a better time than ever to give my standings predictions. I'm going to separate it into two different videos. In this video, we're going over the Eastern Conference. Then later this week, I'll drop my Western Conference. And before we get into my actual rankings and predictions, I do want to say I will be numbering each team by the seed, the worst team being the 15th seed, best team being the 1 seed. But I'm also going to separate them in between tiers. You can move the teams up and down a spot or two within their own tiers, and I really wouldn't be too mad at it. Like I said, there is so much parity right now that it could happen just by a game or so and a team just leapfrogs. But I did end up just, splitting the hairs and really trying to figure out my final standings predictions. And while I will be talking about each individual team, some teams I'll talk a little bit more about than others. So if you want to hear me talk more about your favorite team, make sure you check out my preseason preview videos. I dropped one video on every single team, so your team will be there. Check that out after this one. But without further ado, let's take a look at this bottom tier. In this bottom tier, I have seeds 12 through 15, and I labeled this one Capture the Flag. These are going to be the bottom feeders of the Eastern Conference. At the 15th seed, I have the Brooklyn Nets. 14th seed Washington Wizards, 13th seed Detroit Pistons, and the 12th seeded Chicago Bulls. I named this first tier after Cooper Flag. First, I want to just say Capture the Flag is the coolest tanking nickname I feel like we've seen in a while. But this is the group of teams in the Eastern Conference that I think are going to be the bottom feeders. They're going to be the guys competing for the #1 overall draft pick and try to just get the best lottery odds. But all four of these teams are rebuilding. They all are really young teams, and I don't really expect much from them. This is pretty obvious. I think the Brooklyn Nets and the Washington Wizards are far and above the worst teams. I think those two almost are in a tier of themselves at that bottom level just because the lack of talent there. Like I said, they're really early in their rebuild, so it makes sense for them to be bad. I don't expect them to be putting up a fight in much games this year. But the teams I have above them, like the Detroit Pistons and the Chicago Bulls, I like the direction that both of these teams are going in. I feel like the Detroit Pistons had a great offseason bringing in shooting to surround Cade Cunningham with. They got the new coach in JB Bickerstaff. I do expect to see a lot of improvements from Detroit. Obviously, last year they were that 15th seed. So them jumping up here to around that 12th or 13th seed, that would really benefit them a lot and be steps in their rebuilding. And the Chicago Bulls, I am predicting them to regress. Obviously, last year they were a play-in team. Now I have them at the 12th seed. But that makes sense when you consider they really kicked off their rebuild by trading DeMar DeRozan and trading Alex Caruso. They still have guys like Vucevic or Zach LaVine, so they didn't completely bottom out, and that's why I have them towards the top of this tier. But I do like the fact that they are going more towards their youth. They got in a guy like Josh Giddey, who's still young. Modest Buzelis, I'm really high on it as a draft pick. I feel like they could be a fun team to watch, but I don't think they're anywhere near play-in level. And speaking of play-in level teams, in tier 3, I have the play-in hopefuls. This tier has seeds 9 through 11, and I have the Raptors as the 11th seed, the Hawks as the 10th seed, and the Hornets as the 9th seed. This group of teams is still towards the bottom of the Eastern Conference in my eyes, but they are a little bit better than those other teams I talked about. They're a little further in their rebuild, or they just have more talent on their roster. And I'm pretty confident that 2 out of these 3 teams are going to be that 9th and 10th seed to finish out the bottom bracket of the play-in tournament. I have the Raptors as the team on the outside looking in, but I do think that it's a real possibility that they can make it there. I really like Scotty Barnes and the jumps and growth that he's been showing in the last few seasons. First time All-Star last year. This year I expect him to keep that growth going as an offensive player while already being such a great defender and versatile guy. He brings a lot to the Toronto Raptors, but they also have good talent around him. Guys like Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett make up a pretty good young big 3, if you want to call it that. I feel like there's a lot of room to grow for all 3 of these players, and if that growth comes, then maybe they could be the team that makes it into the play-in tournament. I like a lot of pieces that they have, but I do have them just slightly below guys like the Charlotte Hornets or the Atlanta Hawks. And the team that I have on the top of this tier is the Charlotte Hornets, and I am pretty high on the Charlotte Hornets. I expect them to have a very successful season as long as LaMelo Ball stays healthy. That's the #1 thing, but he's starting to wear ankle braces this year, so hopefully that helps at least a little bit. But if you look at the teams that I have below the Hornets, there's not many of them that have a player better than LaMelo Ball on their roster. Alongside LaMelo, the Charlotte Hornets have a lot of great young guys like a Brandon Miller, who coming into his year 2, I think could really take a huge jump as a creator and as a offensive weapon. I think he could become one of the best scorers in the league further down the line, but in year 2, I'm excited to see where he takes that. Also, off their bench, they got a guy like Trey Mann, who I was pretty high on, and now after watching him in this preseason, it seems like a lot of other players or fans of the NBA are kind of tapping into him and realizing what he could be for Charlotte. I think he is the perfect sixth man for them. But Charlotte has been a fun offensive team for a few seasons now, and it really hasn't gotten them anything. The difference that I see from this team and Charlotte Hornets teams of the past is the structure and the defensive integrity that they're going to have this season, or that I predict that they'll have this season. I really like them hiring Charles Lee as the head coach. I think he's going to come in here and really start building up that culture alongside vets like Seth Curry or Taj Gibson. They also brought in a guy like Josh Green that I think could help defensively. Mark Williams, if he gets healthy, he's a great anchor of their defense. I really have a lot of promise in Charlotte, and again, as long as they stay healthy, I think they could do big things. And in the tier right above them, I have the playoff favorites. In my eyes, the Eastern Conference has a clear top 8 teams and a clear bottom 7 teams, so this is the start of that top 8. These are the teams that I would bet money on make the playoffs. At the 8th seed, we have the Miami Heat, the 7th seed Orlando Magic, 6th seed Cleveland Cavaliers, and the 5th seed Indiana Pacers. From just being around NBA Twitter and just hearing what other people think, I am definitely lower on the Orlando Magic than a lot of people that I've been seeing. And the only thing that's really holding me back from putting them higher in this tier, or even in the top tier, which I've seen some people say there'll be a top 4 team this season, is their offense. I really think that they are going to struggle a lot offensively. Last season, they were one of the worst offenses in the NBA. And this season, they did bring in guys that could help, like a KCP or maybe a Tristan Da Silva if he gets some minutes. I think both these guys could help them with their three-point shooting, which they were one of the worst shooting teams in the NBA. But I don't think their shooting was their only issue. I still think it's going to be relatively bad, even though KCP should help a little bit. I'm more worried about their playmaking and their lack of a true point guard. They're having Jalen Suggs be their starting guard this season, and I don't really love that at all. I think Jalen Suggs is a great defender and makes his money on there. He's a great energy guy and can push the tempo, but when you talk about running an offense, operating a pick and roll, all of those things that a traditional point guard usually does, I don't have a lot of faith in Jalen Suggs to do those things. And the Orlando Magic do rely a lot on Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner to be their main playmakers, their facilitators, run the offense through them. And I do think that could help mitigate the lack of true point guard. But also, both of those guys, I don't really trust too much to run my offense through. Paolo, amazing scorer. Playmaking, though, a little bit shaky. He's shown flashes of being a very good playmaker, but I would like him to get those turnovers down a little bit more. Franz Wagner, too, he's had some wishy-washy games where he has really bad turnovers or his shot's not falling, and it just makes me struggle to put them higher than some of these other teams in this tier list. And I was going back and forth, really struggling on who I wanted to put at the top of this tier list, either the Indiana Pacers or the Cleveland Cavaliers. I ended up going in the Indiana Pacers just because last season they had one of the most electric offenses in the NBA, and this season I think it's going to be a lot of the same stuff. I think Tyrese Halliburton is going to be a great engine to this fast-paced offense. They have a lot of great shooters, a lot of great cutters, just all around. Anyone on their team can go off for double-digit points on any given night, and that is a real hard thing to guard for opposing teams. And we saw last year after the Pascal Siakam trade, they were able to become more of a middle-of-the-pack defense. I think they were still below average, but instead of being like 28th, they were like 18th, which is a big improvement. And now with a full season of Pascal Siakam, I do think that he's going to help them maybe just start off at that like middle of the pack tier instead of having to play catch up. But it's not just Pascal. They have other solid defenders like an Andrew Nembhard or an Aaron Nesmith, Jarris Walker. He might be getting some minutes this season too. Holding it down low, they have Miles Turner. I just have a lot of faith in the Pacers to have that super high quality offense and that middle of the pack to maybe slightly below average defense. When you line those two up together, that makes you a pretty good playoff team. And now for the top tier of the Eastern Conference, I have the championship contenders, seeds 1 through 4. At the 4th seed, I have the Milwaukee Bucks, the 3 seed Philadelphia 76ers, the 2 seeded New York Knicks, and the number 1 seeded Boston Celtics. Now, obviously, there's some teams that I trust more than others in this tier, but I would not be like super blown away, surprised if any of those 4 teams won the NBA championship this season. Between star power, depth, offense, defense, All four of these teams have a great collective of those four qualities, and that makes me pretty confident in them to have at least a deep playoff run. And again, there are some teams that I'm more confident in than others, like the Boston Celtics. I have them as the #1 seed. Like many other people, they are the championship favorites going into the season. But I do think that gap between them and the rest of the East got closer this offseason because teams like the New York Knicks bringing in Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns, they got better as a team. The 76ers bringing in Paul George and a lot of their other role players like Andre Drummond or Caleb Martin, they got better there. The Bucks, they had smaller moves and more moves that were like rounding out the edges, bringing in guys like a Gary Trent Jr. or maybe even a Taurean Prince. I could see DeLon Wright. Again, smaller moves, but they still got better. So the gap between the Celtics and everyone else closed up a little bit for sure. I'm still confident in the Celtics to be that #1 team though. I do think the New York Knicks are going to repeat as that 2 seed. I think they are the team that's probably closest to the Boston Celtics just in overall talent, depth, coaching. I think they have a very well balance of offense and defense on this team between their offensive juggernauts of Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns, and then their defensive duo of Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby. I expect them to be very good this season. And my only one thing that's kind of holding me back from teams like the Sixers or the Bucks to putting them above teams like the New York Knicks, it's health. With the Sixers, obviously, when you talk about Joel Embiid, he's never really had a super healthy season throughout his whole career. He's going through interviews right now saying he'll never play back-to-backs for the rest of his career. That's not a good sign. Just a few nights ago, Paul George hyperextended his leg and is going through injuries. We don't really know the extent of that one just yet at the time of me recording this video, but Paul George has also struggled to stay healthy in the playoffs in his past. So that kind of holds me back on them. And then a team like the Milwaukee Bucks, they're just a really old team. Like, Brook Lopez is one of the oldest players in the NBA now, around like 36 or 37 years old. Chris Middleton, he's dealing with his ankle injuries. Damian Lillard's coming off a down season. I do expect Dame to bounce back, but he's still getting up there in age. And then Giannis Antetokounmpo, he still is one of the top players in the NBA, MVP candidate pretty much every season so far of the last few seasons. But the only thing that's holding me back for him is the last 2 playoffs. He's been hurt. So these bottom 2 teams of the 76ers and the Milwaukee Bucks, I think they have the talent in a perfect world, fully healthy, to compete with teams like the New York Knicks or the Boston Celtics. They just have a little bit more question marks around their players and teams than those top 2 teams. So here you guys go. As a little recap here, I have my Eastern Conference standings predictions. Missing the postseason completely, I have the Brooklyn Nets, Washington Wizards, Detroit Pistons, Chicago Bulls, and Toronto Raptors. Being in the play-in tournament, I have the Atlanta Hawks, Charlotte Hornets, Miami Heat, and Orlando Magic. The Cleveland Cavaliers and Indiana Pacers should be able to be playoff teams without having to go through the play-in tournament. And the Milwaukee Bucks, Philadelphia 76ers, New York Knicks, and Boston Celtics should have home court advantage in the first round. What do you guys think of my Eastern Conference standings? Let me know in the comments below. Tell me which team you think I am the most wrong with. Maybe I'm too high on them, too low on them, whatever it is, let me know in the comments below. I love starting dialogue with you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave it a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the description, there's links to all my social medias, so make sure you follow me on all those to keep up to date with me. Catch ya.